Kevin, remember that one time we interviewed the CEO of Roose?
Yes, the self-driving car company.
Yeah, nice guy. Whatever happened to them?
Well, it's interesting you ask. It's been a very rocky few months for the Roose company, and Kyle Vogt, the CEO, who we interviewed on the show last year, stepped down in November following a big scandal involving regulators and a serious accident and a cruise vehicle called Panini. And it all culminated recently with this big report that was prepared about that incident and kind of what has led Roose to the place it is now. So as of today, the company has lost its license to operate driverless vehicles in California. It has suspended its operations across the country. The company's basically entire leadership has been replaced. A quarter of the staff of Roose has been cut. It's being investigated by the DOJ and the SEC. And now, as of this week, GM announced that they are cutting their investment in Roose by half, about $1 billion this year. So this has been a huge setback for Roose, and I think for the rest of the self-driving car industry too.
So what I'm hearing is that this is a story about how one car accident destroyed an entire company.
It's sort of about that, but I think it's also about kind of self-driving technology as a whole and some of the trade-offs that we're going to see as these cars become more widespread. And I really think we should talk about the Roose incident today because it's not only just kind of like a juicy story, but I think it also really symbolizes the issues with this kind of move fast and break things mentality that a lot of tech companies have, even in areas like self-driving where the costs of a mistake are so grave.
Yes, and I should say I have read the report that came out of this, and there's some really disturbing stuff in there, and I think it is worth going through it.
Yeah, and it really matters what happens to Roose. This was one of only 2 companies that was offering self-driving sort of hailable rides in San Francisco and other cities. The other one, Waymo, is still operating. You can take their cars today in San Francisco, but Roose was a big player and a company that GM in particular had bet a lot of money on sort of being the first to bring this technology to market. And I'm a person who thinks that driverless cars are one of the most important technologies out there today. I think that roads are tremendously unsafe, and self-driving cars, if they work well, they could make things a lot safer, but there are also still some issues with them. And so I think it's worth taking sort of a closer look at what happened at Roose because I think some of these same dynamics could play out across the industry in the coming years.
Yeah, so let's get into it.
So I think to tell this story, we have to rewind the clock to October 2nd of last year. And that night in San Francisco, there was an accident. Now, this accident was not caused by a Roose self-driving car. It was caused by a human driver who basically did a hit and run on a pedestrian in downtown San Francisco. That pedestrian was flung by this human driver collision into the path of a Roose autonomous vehicle. The Roose vehicle tried to slam on the brakes, but it ended up hitting her, and then it tried to execute a pullover maneuver, which is what it's programmed to do when it sort of sees something.
And when you say execute a pullover maneuver, you mean pullover.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm just using the language that Roose used in his report.
Okay.
So it tries to pull over because that's what it's supposed to do. And in the process of pulling over, it drags this poor woman about 20 feet to the side of the road while pulling over.
Because critically, and here is where the AI messed up, the AI thought that the woman had hit the car on its side, and so that it would be safe to pull over. In fact, the woman was in the front of the car. And so as the car pulled over, it dragged the woman 20 feet, and she was left in critical condition.
Yes. So very sad story. But what happened next is that in responding to this incident, Roose was supposed to meet with a bunch of regulators to basically debrief the incident and see what could be done to fix this kind of thing in the future. And in the process of those meetings with government officials and regulators, Roose executives basically left out the fact that their car, while it had not caused the initial injury, did drag this woman about 20 feet before coming to a stop.
So this winds up becoming the key omission that winds up, essentially causing the company to collapse. In the immediate aftermath of the accident, though, Roose really only wanted to communicate one message, which was, hey, we didn't cause this accident.
Right.
And so this is the narrative that they take out to the media. This is the drum that they beat. And they're so fixated on the fact that they did not cause the initial accident that they wind up making a bunch more mistakes.
So the basic story is, there's this accident. Roose responds, meets with all these regulators and government officials to talk about what happened, plays them footage from the cameras that were on the car at the time of the incident, but kind of glosses over the fact that their car dragged the woman about 20 feet before coming to a stop. They get caught sort of doing this kind of selective presentation, and GM, which is the majority owner of Roose, sort of replaces the senior leadership of the company and commissions a law firm to basically investigate what happened and come up with a report. And this report was made public just recently, and it is a wild document. Did you read it?
I did read it, and it was probably the most interesting thing I've ever read that was written by Quinn Emanuel, Urquhart, and Sullivan, the law firm that did the report.
Yeah, I love these kind of lawyers' reports because it's like the precision in these documents, the timestamps on all the Slack messages. It is just like you do not want this kind of thing to happen to you.
You don't. And yet, at the end of the day, Roose is their client, and they do pay for everything that's happening. And so I do feel like the law firm sort of writes about it in a hilarious, letting them off the hook way that I would like to talk about more.
Yeah, so let's talk about this report. So The report basically says that, in the immediate aftermath of this incident, Roose was sort of worried because initial media reports suggested, some of them, that Roose's self-driving car had in fact caused this accident, that this was a case of a driverless car hitting a pedestrian, which would be a big story.
Yes. And it is the sort of the story that the entire press corps has been waiting for ever since these self-driving cars got on the road. When would one of them cause a potentially fatal accident? And so now it happens. And so Roose, which I'm sure already had a full plan ready to execute the moment that this happened, they spring into action.
Right. So on October 3rd, after this incident happens, Roose executives and employees are kind of trying to piece together what happened. They're looking at the footage from the cameras on these vehicles. And at around 3:45 a.m., according to this report, a Roose employee first sees the full video of the incident and learns that in addition to kind of hitting this pedestrian and stopping, their car also pulled over and dragged the woman with it. So the company's senior leadership, including Kyle Vogt, meets to discuss this new video and sort of tries to decide whether or not they're going to sort of update the media with this new detail, and they decide not to.
Oh, that seems like a mistake in retrospect. Yeah.
Yeah. So they also meet with the mayor of San Francisco's transportation advisor. They meet with a bunch of regulators, including NHTSA, the DMV, and the California Highway Patrol. And same thing. They talk about this incident. They show this video of the footage from some of the cameras, but they do not sort of proactively bring up the fact that their car dragged this woman after hitting her.
And here is how this is described by Quinn Emanuel, by the way. Quote, in each of those meetings, Roose had the intent to affirmatively disclose those material facts by playing the full video and letting, quote, the video speak for itself. Because Roose adopted that approach, it did not verbally point out these facts. So I just that is such a hilarious word salad to explain why after you drag a woman 20 feet and you're meeting with regulators, you do not mention that you dragged a woman 20 feet.
But you're leaving out the best part of this, which was that apparently Roose tried to play video of the crash to officials, but the person who was playing it, their Wi-Fi was not up to the task. They had bandwidth issues and a poor internet connection that prevented the regulators from seeing the complete and clear full video of the accident. And not only did this happen in one meeting, it apparently happened in 3 different meetings. And I would just like to say to this Roose employee, please call Comcast. Upgrade your plan. When you are showing a crash video to regulators, you're definitely going to want the gigabit fiber.
This truly is the most dog ate my homework excuse for not being able to show this video to regulators that I can even imagine. And when I saw it, I really did gag a bit.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
So the entire future of the driverless car industry, we now know, may hinge on one Cruise employee's shitty Wi-Fi.
Wait, I just want to share Quinn Emanuel's conclusion about this, which is, quote, even after obtaining the full video, Cruise did not correct the public narrative, but continued instead to share incomplete facts and video about the accident with the media and the public. This conduct has caused both regulators and the media to accuse Cruise of misleading them. It's like, yeah, you think?
Yeah. So, there's a lot more in this report. It's very detailed. It's many, many pages long, and a lot of it's just kind of internal fact finding. But basically, the overarching conclusion that this investigation draws is that Cruise executives and leadership sort of materially misrepresented what happened on this October 2nd night with this pedestrian to regulators, which is a very bad thing to do if you are a company in a heavily regulated industry like transportation.
So, the law firm that did the report, I think, disagrees with the idea that this misleading was intentional. The report says, quote, despite the failure to discuss the pullover maneuver or pedestrian dragging with regulators, the evidence reviewed to date does not establish that Cruise leadership or employees sought to intentionally mislead or hide from regulators the details of the October 2nd accident. Instead, they attempted to show the full video of the accident in good faith, but with varying degrees of success due to technical issues. Yeah, and I would not say this rises to the level where you can truly call it a cover-up, but it does sort of feel like a cover-up by omission, right? Where, like, the company did go out of its way to just not say what had happened, and when the inevitable happened, which was that regulators finally see the full video, it finally becomes clear to them what has truly happened. Well, of course they wind up being way more upset than they would have than if Cruise had just been honest with them from the beginning.
Yeah, and I've talked to some people who were involved in this situation over the past few weeks, and the folks on the kind of GM and regulator side of this just basically paint Cruise as this kind of reckless startup that was more interested in kind of scaling their business and getting as many of their cars onto the road as they can and sort of taking market share away from Waymo than they were about making sure that all their vehicles were safe. And people on the other side, the sort of more Cruise-friendly part of this, say, well, we just have our risk calculations all wrong when it comes to driverless cars. We shouldn't be asking, are these things perfectly safe? Are they never going to be involved in an accident? Are they never going to hurt someone? We should be comparing them against human drivers who we know cause accidents and hurt people all the time. And so in their minds, this is just kind of like an overly cautious set of regulators and an overly cautious corporate parent kind of looking over this with just the wrong set of risk calculations in their brains.
Well, I have to say, I think that really misses the point. I think that the real story here is even sadder because, look, Kevin, the moment you decide to create a self-driving car company, you have to prepare for the extreme likelihood that at some point there is going to be a serious injury, accident, and even a fatal accident, right? And I'm sure Cruise had done a lot of thinking leading up to this moment about how it was going to handle that situation. Again, human-driven cars are killing people every day. This should not surprise anyone. Our hope is that these things become safer. And what this incident is really about is that the AI made a mistake, and probably a mistake that a human being would not make. And that is tragic, and that is worth exploring. But that's not why Cruise barely exists anymore. It barely exists anymore because in the aftermath of this, the company could not just say like, oh, we made a mistake, let's own up to our mistake, and let's fix it and move on. If they had done that, I truly think Cruise vehicles would still be on the road today.
Yeah, that's a good point. And we should say, like, Cruise, it still exists. They're still planning to expand their services in the future.
They say they are, but like, it's like, what happens? Like, is Cruise going to continue to exist in any meaningful way, do you think?
Look, I think GM has sunk a lot of money into this company. These services, these driverless sort of taxi services, they are just hemorrhaging cash. It's very expensive to build and maintain and, keep these cars on the roads. And they're not really making money from them right now. And so I think GM probably sees this as an opportunity to kind of cut back some of its losses. But look, I do think driverless cars are not going away. The technology is here. So what do you think happens now to the dream of driverless cars? Like, does this push the kind of time frame out by several years because now we only have one driverless car company offering rides instead of two? Or like, what do you think happens to Waymo, for example, as a result of this?
I mean, I have to believe that it does slow the progress of this industry. I think that competition makes industries grow faster. And now that, as you point out, Waymo is the only self-driving car company on the streets, that progress probably is going to slow a bit. So that's kind of what I'm expecting to see. I'm very curious to see where Cruise is a year from now. Like, on one hand, I agree, GM has invested so much money, you can't really imagine them pulling the plug. But on the other hand, every action that they've taken since this happened has given me the impression that they really are not thrilled with this crew. So we'll have to see. But it's just a terrible black eye for the industry, and I do worry it could cost people's lives. What do you think?
So I think this is going to slow the self-driving car industry, less on the kind of consumer adoption side than on the regulatory side. We're already starting to see evidence that this is sort of expanding just beyond Cruise. Last week, the city of San Francisco sued a state commission for allowing Waymo and Cruise to expand to the city. So this is going to result in collateral damage to Waymo too, even though that company appears to have done nothing wrong. And in fact, their safety record is quite good.
So Waymo could actually go away even in San Francisco now.
That remains to be seen. I think there would be people who would be upset if that happened. And I also think there'd be people who would probably be pretty happy about it.
Now, we always try to leave people with a bit of hope, or at least something, practical that they can do. So here's what I'm going to say. The next time that there is one of these self-driving car accidents and investigators are trying to get to the bottom of it, and the person trying to show you the video says, "I'm sorry, my internet just isn't working," say, "You know what? We're just going to pause the meeting. Why don't you go to a coffee shop and just put the video in a Dropbox folder, okay? And then we'll download it, and then we'll look at the video. And then you can tell us what you think happened in the video, and then we can sort of, bypass this whole issue that seemed to plague us this time."